Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the RDH Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chad, and alongside me is my brother, Tanner. How's it hanging, dude?
You know, it's good. And in preparation for this episode, if you haven't read the title, we are ranking the top 30 receivers in the NFL. In preparation for this episode, I had no idea what to do on this list. This was probably the hardest list I think we've ever made because one, it's really long, and two, there's just a whole 20 receivers that could be interchangeable depending on how you view the game and I guess just what your personality is. Honestly, I don't know.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I was making the list too, and I'm sitting there going, man, I got guys in the top 20 that are number 2 wide receivers on teams. I need to move them in outside of that. You know what I mean? I need to
Yeah.
put them in the 20 to 30 range. So yeah, I mean, in a lot of picks that I put on my list too are literally guys that I think are going to have good seasons next year. But if you haven't read the title, today we're ranking wide receivers. We ranked 30, and then we have 5 honorable mentions. Today we're going to be hitting the honorable mentions, and we're going to be hitting 30 through 15 on my list and Tanner's list. We both have different lists. We have no idea who's on each other's list, but appreciate all the love we've gotten so far, especially on the running back rankings. Um, Dude, this was a fun one, but let's jump into it. No other sports today, just this. Let's start with the honorable mentions. I'm gonna go ahead and start it off with my, not in any particular order here, my honorable mentions, but I have to put him here. Just respect on his name, and he doesn't have a team right now, and it's DeAndre Hopkins. Going into last year, DeAndre Hopkins is probably top 15 on this list. After last year, you kind of saw the decline that DeAndre Hopkins had. But at the same time, he was hurt, and the Cardinals' offense was kind of a dumpster fire with all the injuries there. So I think DeAndre Hopkins walks into any team and is easily a wide receiver number 2, if not a wide receiver number 1. And Tanner, how is he not signed by anybody yet, dude?
It's really weird. I mean, the whole situation is kind of strange because at one point in time, I was doing this list. I'll admit he is on my list and he is a decent amount higher, but he he looked like honestly the best receiver in the NFL at one point a couple years ago, if not top 3, right? And
Yes,
he
he
just
dominated the league.
he fell off the face of the earth and you don't really see him that much anymore. And he obviously he played for the Cardinals and he played all right there. He had a good season, and then recency happens, and you don't really see him at all anymore. The PED stuff came in. He got a suspension, injuries, all that kind of stuff. So I don't know. I really don't know. He's very talented. He has hands like you've never seen before. It's like he puts glue on him before every game. He just goes up and he just sticks to the ball. Like
Oh
I
yeah, dude. He reminds me of Andre Johnson, but like faster. And
yeah.
nah, actually maybe not faster, but nastier hands, which is crazy to think about that he has better hands than Andre Johnson. But said it, right? He kind of has disappeared. He's not the DeAndre Hopkins that he is, but whenever you turn on a game, you watch him make 4 or 5 catches a game that he shouldn't make.
Yeah.
And every single catch he makes is contested, but it's hard. That's why I had to put him in my honorable mentions, just because you said you got him on the list. I totally understand. I got some guys on the list you're probably going to shake your head at, but it's hard for me, right? He doesn't have a team still. A lot of really good players don't have a team. A lot of really good running backs don't have a
Mhm.
team right now. But we're talking wide receivers this episode. Who's your first honorable mention?
Same as yours in no particular order. My first honorable mention is Gabe Davis, and I think it's fair to put him here just because I was looking at how my rankings kind of sorted out at the end, and I'm like, he deserves a spot on this list, but there's just not enough room. There's too many receivers, and we saw that playoff game he was in. He had 3 touchdowns or whatever, that crazy Buffalo KC kind of game, and he balled out and he had a spectacular game. But he's kind of that number 2, number 3. He's borderline number 3 if you really look at it on that team, which kind of sucks because he's a good player. He's a very good player, but it's just kind of the biggest role, the biggest ceiling I've seen him reach, and that's kind of why he's at that honorable mention spot. Not saying he's a bad receiver or anything. He gets a little overshadowed by Stephon Diggs and whatever that offense wants to do at the time.
Clay, and I mean your offense is really honing into Josh Allen, right? It's
Yeah.
Josh Allen doesn't necessarily stuff anybody in terms of giving him the ball, more than another player aside from Stephon Diggs. Other than Stephon Diggs, in the offense is completely everybody else gets the ball. Who's ever open gets the ball. That's why Gabe Davis had that random like one-off playoff game where it was just like, wait, what? And I just so happened uh, pick him in DraftKings. I remember that because I remember I won my bet or whatever it was, and I was just like, how did I win that bet? And I was like, oh, I had Gabe Davis. Yeah, that's right. It was like a flex spot starting. You know what I mean? And that's kind of Gabe Davis's role for me. In terms of fantasy, in terms of production. Me talking fantasy because I don't work in the NFL. I wish I did. I wish I worked in the front office so I could maybe bring in a player like that. But I only got fantasy and I got Madden. Right, those are the only two things I got. And in fantasy, that's a flex spot. Gabe Davis is an absolute flex player. My next honorable mention, I have Drake London, the wide receiver from the Atlanta Falcons. Once again, this is a guy that I think is going to have a breakout year. Uh, when you watch him play, it's a young wide receiver that has really good hands. At the same time, he does lack a little bit of speed. And when you're that kind of player, you need to create separation at some point, right? You need to create separation either when you're getting right off the line, when you're going up to get the ball in the air, jumping off the point of attack. Like you have to be able to create that separation some point when you're trying to get the ball, right? Or trying to get rid of the cornerback or defensive back, whoever's guarding you to get the ball. And need to see a little bit better separation from Drake London because when I watched him play this past year, now given the ball wasn't the best ball being thrown to him,
Yes.
I want you to go up and get that ball in the end zone. That is his role. Red zone player, and he is a deep threat. Ever he gets the ball right, so he reminds me a lot of Michael Pittman, who's on this list. You know what I mean? I think Michael Pittman's a little bit faster. I think Drake London's a little bit bigger in terms of just size when you look at him. That's my honorable mention. I do think he's going to have a big season because he is the clear-cut number one option wide receiver wise in Atlanta.
Yeah, I completely agree. He's also one of my honorable mentions, and a lot of the same reasons kind of apply to my list as well. It's the thing that like kind of knocked me about him is whenever I would watch him like play and that offense run, they would kind of make him and force him to like take these long routes and these like long developing plays, and they would eventually pass the ball to him, in like in a lot of space in the open middle of the field, and that's like where he would get the majority of his yards. But I wish I would just see him more in like those shorter kind of yardage routes, like something simple, a quick little route instead of something that's like long developing in a play, And I think that would help his game a lot, just so you can have some variety in his game. Maybe stick him in the slot, help him get those shorter routes down because I think he is like a shifty player, and I think he can make plays in like those short yardage situations. So I don't know. I would just like the Atlanta Falcons to kind of explore more with him, especially in the way that the NFL is going, right? Because there's not like a clear position when it comes to receivers anymore, right? You can stick them anywhere. And if you're one of the good ones, you can play anywhere, right? So I think it's fun. I think he deserves a spot in maybe like the slot or maybe on the other side, maybe just switch it up a little bit more. I don't know. That's my big knock on him.
And I mean, I completely agree, right? There's a reason he's an honorable mention, and I'm almost projecting him this season solely on Bijan Robinson taking the majority of the carries and Kyle Pitts taking a little bit left, and then whatever's left over is Drake London's. You know what I mean? I don't see really anybody else on that team that's going to contribute a whole hell of a lot right off the rip. Maybe there's a waiver pickup wire. Also Cordell Patterson. I don't know if he's been signed back yet. That's always the guy that, like you were talking about, can play literally anywhere, and that's kind of what this team has, right? Like you have Kyle Pitts that can line up pretty much anywhere. You have a running back in oh my gosh, Bijan. There we go. With Bijan also can line up anywhere. You know what I mean? Like you watch training camp and you watch him and you're like, this dude looks like Alvin Kamara out of the backfield. It's unbelievable. And he didn't really have a whole heck of a lot of that in college. So yeah, just that's why I think he's going to have a really good year this year in fantasy. If you're picking fantasy, doing this podcast is great. I love doing the podcast, but all my homies in my fantasy league listen to it and I'm giving away all my secrets. But anyway, this year, if you're looking in fantasy like Drake London, that's a player that could perform at a flex spot. You know what I think? I think he's a good flex spot. I think he's a wide receiver 3 realistically in some leagues. Deeper leagues. He's not going to go in the first couple rounds. Like I'm saying, he's not even in our top 30, but he is a top 35. Right. So I think this guy's a really good flex player with the opportunity to break into your starting lineup in fantasy. Go ahead and take somebody else off your list, Tanner.
Another honorable mention I have, and this is I feel like he's just like the honorable mention of the NFL, and I feel like you'll agree with me on this. Is Tyler Boyd? I mean, which it sucks because he is like the number 3 receiver on the Bengals, and I mean their top 2 are on my list. You know what I mean? Like it's hard to put him in a place that I can respect. I can respect because I have a lot of respect for Tyler Boyd, and he's a really really good receiver, and he's been so for a long time, but his other 2 teammates just put up better stats and get the ball more. So it's kind of hard to see it. He's kind of that old regime of the Bengals offense, but I'm glad to see he's still here. He still makes plays, and when the game's on the line, he can make that play. He can catch that touchdown.
I mean, you watched him this year. Tyler Boyd was massive on third down, huge, like huge in third down, if not one of the best in the NFL, if I'm not mistaken. With like hands, drop passes on third down is real low. When you have a player like Tyler Boyd and he's your number 3, I mean, that's absolutely unbelievable. That's a number 2 on every NFL team, unless you're, the Eagles, probably. Like that's literally a number 2. I don't think he's gonna take out Jay Smith, but it's a player that, yeah, like every team needs one of those guys, right? Like that's a guy that has been around the team, like you said, feels like he's old regime, but he's still young somehow, still
Yeah.
going out there making plays, doing everything. So yeah, I mean that's definitely a great guy to have on the honorable mentions. Jumping to my honorable mention, this one I just had to put in there because this man literally has won me a couple fantasy championships with Deontay Johnson, the wide receiver out of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Go look, and he's got 1,000 yards pretty much every single season since he's been in the league. And if it hasn't, it's because of injury history. And the thing with him, man, is he's so fast. And you watched it that one year. I don't remember who his counterpart was, but Johnson was not supposed to be the number 2, number 1 wide receiver on that depth chart. This was like right after Antonio Brown had left. You know what I mean? Back when Antonio Brown was still AB, and performing at that level. And dude stepped in like nobody left, and it was incredible. And the thing is his first season he had a lot of drops, but then he got it under control. And that next season, dude, he performed only in the second half of the season. It seemed like, but no, every game he performed, he was really good. And that's why I have to put him on my honorable mentions list. And this is a team that if they get one more wide receiver, there are other wide receivers on my board. I'm not going to give away the exact spot. That's another really good duo and a potentially really good trio in the NFL.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I will say Deontay Johnson is on my list, so it doesn't make it makes a lot of sense to put him in the honorable mentions. He's been he's kind of like the forgotten part of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Like you look at him and you look at this offense and you're like, oh, cool, George Pickens, he's new, he's fun, he's entertaining, and then you look at it and it's like Deontay Johnson has been doing that for a while. Just nobody really talks about it. If you play big into fantasy, you probably see him a lot in like flex spots and stuff like that, especially since he's big on like punt returns and kick returns and stuff like that on special teams. If your league counts that, which ours does, but it's he's kind of like a jack of all trades. He's not like really really good at one thing. He's just good at a lot of things, and I think that's what makes him so special and so like utilizable for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Nice word. Impressive.
Thank you.
Go ahead with your next guy. I can't wait tell you my next guy, but I have to let you go because I'm gonna be on a rant on this guy. I'm just gonna let you know.
Okay, that's fine. I'll keep the train going. My honorable mention is George Pickens because of a lot of the same reasons I was talking about. He's funny, not funny. He's fun. He's entertaining. He's just exciting to watch if you're a Steelers fan because he just kind of has that extra gear we always talk about on this podcast, right? He can go up, he can catch those balls, those weird contested, strange catches that you don't see very often, right? And he's a physical, big receiver. I wanted him so badly in the draft whenever Cleveland was picking, and they just passed right by him. And I was like, no. I was so sad. And, of course, he's turned out to be a very good player. And, I mean, the sky's the limit for this guy. He's been in the season a very short time, and he's already getting so many, like, head nods from other teams and, like, other, like, just social media platforms. He looks really good, and he's really young. And I don't know. The Pittsburgh Steelers may have another good receiver on their hands.
Exactly. When you have a player coming in and taking the spotlight away from a Deontay Johnson with how utilizable, nailed it. Thanks, Tanner. I had to steal that from you. from that standpoint, it's really hard to say. I don't know if they need a wide receiver, right? Like you look at the team and you're like, yeah, they definitely need a wide receiver too, but you didn't expect him to come in and be as. Let me stop myself. He's not consistent yet. He needs to get consistent, but you saw flashes and you saw glimpses of it last year, and that's exactly what you're talking about with all the head nods. You have NFL GMs and you have him being ranked top players right now. It's like, what? You know what I mean? Like he's
Yeah.
so young. You can't even there's no way. I saw bids on him for awards and everything. You know what I mean? He is respected around the league for a really damn good reason. He's a great football player. You know what I mean? He has that high point of attack that I was talking or the getting the ball out of the air that I was talking about earlier that it needs to develop, right? Drake London needs to go up and get the ball. He needs to elevate himself. It's almost like another level. It's like you're box jumping. You know what I mean? You're doing the box jumps, but then you're jumping way higher than that freaking box somehow. DeAndre Hopkins, like he's levitating in midair, getting the ball. He just has a little bit
Yeah.
more hang time than the corner. It's a weird skill, but when you're a big receiver, calf, he's on the list. Just go watch him catch a ball. He's just up there a little bit longer than the defensive back, and he's so big and so powerful that you don't get the opportunity to take the ball away from him because he has vice grips for hands. And that's why I love watching George Pickens too, because you have these throws from Kenny Pickett that are wild field, and George Pickens just like, that's mine. You know what I mean? Like you'll see a Kenny Pickett throw every now and then, 30-yard dime down the sideline, dotting it right to him. Bam. Go touch inbounds. And you're like, supposed to be able to touch inbounds after turning around and possession catching it and getting hit by another guy. Somehow the defender's on the ground and he's still running on the sideline. Second, this guy's got something else.
Yeah.
So completely agree. Great honorable mention. My honorable mention, who I'm going to go on a rant about, is Christian Kirk. Christian Kirk, Jacksonville Jaguars, $70 million plus contract last year. If you listen to Chad and Brad Sports, that was the former podcast. Yeah, I may have ripped on the contract a little bit. I may have just a bit. But at the same time, I also said with the contract, Trevor Lawrence is going to be there, so he's going to elevate his play. And Christian Kirk is he's not a number 2 wide receiver like he was. Now he's a number 1 wide receiver, getting the ball thrown to by a quarterback who makes him open. That's something he's probably never had career. You know what I mean? I know he had some great guys at A&M, but they stay on the field consistently with coaching there due to injuries and other things. You know what I mean? But had some really good quarterbacks in his past, but I think this is the best quarterback he's ever had. And last season was the best season he's ever had. And he has one more good season, and he pays for that contract completely. $72 million, it's completely paid for. You know, last year he stepped in, was the number 1 wide receiver. Zay Jones there too, if I'm not mistaken. And he was a clear-cut number 1 there, right alongside with Evan Ingram. And that's really nice to see when you have another guy this year that is a clear-cut number 1 on every team with Calvin Ridley coming into the league. That's an automatic. Now Zay Jones is your number 3, dude. You've got Calvin Ridley, who's automatically going to step in as your number 2. Christian Kirk's going to take the number 1 corner for the first. Here's my take on this. First 4 games, 3 games, then it's going to shift, and Calvin Ridley's going to go. I think Calvin Ridley this year is a sleeper. I think that guy is a sleeper, and he got caught gambling on some games. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So did Jameson Williams. Jameson Williams is going to come back and play this year. That's another sleeper who, if he plays this year, could be on the list next year because the sky's the limit for that guy too. But there's so many question marks. The question mark with this Jacksonville offense is not Trevor Lawrence, and it's not Christian Kirk, and it's not Evan Ingram. It's Calvin Ridley. Kirk's going to be all reliable. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And look at his numbers last year, dude.
He played well.
He was like a top 15 wide receiver fantasy.
Yeah. Over 1,000 yards. He played really well. I don't see any problem with him being there at all. I mean, Calvin Ridley, it was the question going into that season was like, can he do it? You know, can he become that number 1 wide receiver? Can he fill the shoes that, you know, that paycheck had left behind, right? And I think he did. I think he did really well. And I don't think you can say that he wasn't a number 1 wide receiver, you know? Like, he had times where, you know, he would kind of disappear a little bit, but you know, it's his first stint as a number 1 wide receiver. He's got Trevor Lawrence now. Trevor Lawrence is confident. He's going to get him the ball more. And like you said, Calvin Ridley is going to open up the offense a lot more. So I like it a lot. I like Christian Kirk. I liked him when he was playing at A&M. I watched a lot of games when he was playing there, and I mean, he's fun. He was at A&M. He was clearly like the best player on the offensive side of the ball. You could see it when A&M stepped on the field. He made a lot of plays, and I mean, Jacksonville doesn't do it a lot, but he is a big factor in like special teams and punt returns and kick returns and stuff like that. Which is kind of I don't think they utilize him a bunch in that kind of area, but I think they should. He's very quick. He got a lot of finesse to his game, which is the thing that I like a lot about him. And he's just like he's unexpected, or he's like unexpecting. Like if you're willing to make a tackle on him, he's gonna do something that's gonna make you go, oh, what the heck, and he's gonna like juke you out of a tackle or something like that. It's not like the size or something like that that's gonna make him the biggest threat on the field. He's got a lot of other intangibles that help him with his game.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And when you have a player with that kind of speed too, the screen game is a game that Trevor Lawrence can get the rock out real quick. He's really good at that. He has a really fast release. And so when you have a player like Christian Kirk and you can rip it like that, behind that very athletic young offensive line, it's going to be a pretty good mix. Jumping to my last honorable mention, I had to put him on the list. Fantasy wise, he didn't for me, but I can't lie, when I'm watching him play, he's so good. He would have gotten the ball a whole lot more if he was not in this offense. Brandon Ayuk, the wide receiver for the San Francisco 49ers. I could not keep him off this list. Once again, these honorable mentions are not in any order, but Brandon Ayuk is a guy that you're telling me is a number 2 wide receiver on any NFL team in the league. It's not even close. I think him and Devontae Smith are very close in terms of ranking on this list. Now, Devontae Smith is way up there, but the reason I have him in the honorable mentions is just because you haven't seen the production that you wanted from him, right? Like you haven't seen the overwhelming production that you consistently want to see. Brandon Ayuk will disappear for 2 games, come back on that 3rd game and rock you for 150 yards and like 6 catches. But a little bit more consistency, which is why he's on this honorable mentions list. And when you have George Kittle, when you have Deebo Samuel, and when you have Christian McCaffrey on the line, it's kind of hard it's kind of hard to throw him the rock. You know what I mean? But I got to put Brandon Ayuk up there.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, it's hard. The biggest thing is it's hard to stand out in that offense. It's just a fact. There's so many good names. The ball's going to go other places. It has to. I remember when he was a rookie and they started to actually like feature him in their offense. I mean, he was making those sideline catches and going deep, and he was just freaking just ripping it down the end zone, and it was so cool. And I'm a big fan of his. He's definitely on my list. So we'll get there when we get there. I don't remember exactly where he's at, but all around great player. If he was on any other team, he would be like a number 2 at least.
Minimum, yeah, for sure. On bad teams, definitely jumping up to number 1 status. Who is have we hit all your honorable mentions?
I have one more, and this honorable mention is pretty special to me because he is coming off of an ACL tear, and you know who I'm talking about. And I think he deserves a spot on this honorable mention list just because of this. He had a bad season, but he got paid a lot of money, and the Dallas Cowboys paid him a lot of money. It's Michael Gallup, and with Brandon Cooks coming in, I don't know what Michael Gallup's role is going to be. I think he's still going to be the number 2. I think that makes sense, and he's going to be that go ball receiver. But I don't know. He got paid a lot of money like a number 1 wide receiver, but so far he hasn't shown up to it. He's been you've seen him in the past. He's had a 1,000-yard season before, and he's made great catches, great sideline catches, great toe tap catches, and he's gone up to get the ball, and he's a really good receiver at some points, but at other points it kind of just doesn't really work out. That it's kind of all you really see with Michael Gallup's game is like the inconsistency, which is what's plaguing him throughout his career as you like look at the overarching thing as a whole. So I don't know. I think that deserves him a spot on the honorable mentions list. I think he's a really talented receiver, and if he can get right back on that back foot, just get back into his form again, get into peak form again, he can be a good receiver again. I really think so. I think he's going to take a step up this season. I hope he does. There's going to be a lot of opportunities for him to do that in this Cowboys offense.
Yeah, I mean, you have a Cowboys offense that is absolutely going to feature CeeDee Lamb and Tony Pollard. Other than that, I'm not sure who else is going to get the rock and win. Michael Gallup is coming off an injury, did get paid contract. I was one of the very few Cowboy fans that wasn't a big fan of that contract, wasn't a big fan of that signing in general. I don't think Michael Gallup is worth that money. I, I hate to say it, but I've been saying it since he's been here. I think he's a really, really good number three if you need him to be a number three. But at the same time, I will say that Michael Gallup has absolutely won Dallas some very important games down the stretch. And when you do that and Jerry Jones is in attendance in those games, it's going to be hard for him to pass you up and not sign him. I was at those games in person where Michael Gallup won. I was at the game where Michael Gallup caught a touchdown pass and broke his leg, somehow kept possession of that ball and toe tap in right before he went out. So it's hard to not pay somebody just off that alone, right? Who else is going to make that catch? Not a whole lot of people are going to make that catch in that time. But no disrespect on Gallup's name, but at the same time, yeah, this year I need to see it. Same thing with Dak Prescott. I need to see him win more than one playoff game. You know what I mean? Like I need to see a lot from this offense this year. A lot of free agents coming up in this Dallas Cowboys team, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Dak Prescott in 2 years is going to be a free agent. And Michael Gallup right now is not doing himself any favors in terms of production on the field. But let me preface that. Dallas's offense has not been this good for a very long time. You have CeeDee Lamb, who is arguably not arguably, if you don't think CeeDee Lamb's a top 10 wide receiver in the league, you're crazy. Arguably a top 5 wide receiver in the league, in my opinion, if you're going to start a franchise. Probably the number 3 youngest wide receiver that I would go after Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. CeeDee Lamb is literally right there. Yes, I'm taking him over Garrett Wilson. Yes, I'm taking him over Chris Olave. But when you have a guy like CeeDee Lamb that's going to command that kind of production and what he's going to do, and here's the best part, CeeDee Lamb loves to line up in the slot, right? Brandon Cooks is a burner. Michael Gallup is a burner. Let me take that back. Michael Gallup is not a burner. Michael Gallup is not a burner, but go up and get the ball and he high points and gets that ball up, right? Brandon Cooks is going to be that burner down the field. You have to have safety help, and you have to have who's ever on CD, maybe even somebody pushing him off the line too, trying to trip him up. Double covered, triple covered, which means you're going to have Michael Gallup single covered and one safety, maybe. But then you have Brandon Cooks on the other side, who is the burner, who is going to need safety help on that side. So I think that adding Brandon Cooks and adding a speedy wide receiver to this offense actually opens up Michael Gallup's game even more because of CeeDee Lamb's ability to jump into the slot. Mm-hmm. So he's definitely not somebody that I had on my list, but now that you say it and now that I'm talking about it, me excited for what he's going to do this season. Not to mention, doesn't really have a red zone guy.
I mean,
it's Michael Gallup in a nutshell.
It is Michael Gallup, and I think a big thing about Michael Gallup is just that he's very good and he's very solid in like his technique and his fundamentals, right? You see him all the time. We talked about his toe tap catches and his sideline catches and his ability to just like, be like very next to like a defender and be able to just grab the ball like right here. He's going down. It's a hard angle, because you're looking back as a receiver and you have this cornerback who's like in your face trying to get the ball away from you, and it's just right there. If the ball's well placed, of course, he's going to catch that ball and he's going to take possession. Even if he somehow like breaks his leg, he's going to get possession of the ball and he's going to get 2 feet in. I think that's what like puts him in that honorable mention spot. He doesn't have the big flashy plays, but he does have those big yardage games, a couple a game, more than a couple a season, just something to get the offense going, keep the defense on their toes. That's why I think he's so special for this offense.
And we'll see what happens this season. Jumping to the official list now, number 30 on my list. We already kind of touched on him, but I had to put him on the list just because I think he is now number 1 option in Pittsburgh with George Pickens. I do think Deontay Johnson is now sitting down 2 option, but I do think that Deontay Johnson at the number 2 option is going to demand, like I said with CeeDee Lamb, no matter what, the safety has to look at him. But at the same time, the other safety is going to have to look at George Pickens because, like Tanner said, he goes up and gets that ball and he's not afraid to do it. And when you're doing it at that young of an age and as a rookie, and you're that good and that levels above everybody on your team, it's pretty cool to see. You know what I mean? Pittsburgh has some solid players, like we were saying. To continue that production, Kenny Pickett's going to settle down this season. He was very very, very going crazy last year, going a little bit crazy at times when you watch those games. I was watching those games. I'm like, dude, sit in the pocket. You know what I mean? Me sitting there like dropping potato chips on my stomach. I'm like, yeah, sit in the pocket more. You know what I mean? But you watch him, he's just a little bit too antsy. And this year, I think he's going to settle down, and I think George Pickens is going to get the rock way more. And I'm interested to see what this Pittsburgh offense does, because Kenny Pickett, to me, I don't know if he's the guy in Pittsburgh, but I think George Pickens is. So that's my number 30. Who do you got?
Uh, yeah, it with George Pickens too. Just like he he just looks like the real deal. You know, when you watch him play, he looks like he can do it, and it looks like he can be a star in the NFL, which is awesome for Pittsburgh. And he's just like I said, he's just flashy. He's fun to watch. He's fun to game plan against. I don't know. He's a fun wide receiver. I'm a big fan of him. I hope he succeeds. Like in terms of like Antonio Brown. Like I hope he becomes like that Antonio Brown. I think he can do it. He has all like the frame, the stuff like that. He can be a good wide receiver in the NFL. I would love to see it. But my number 30, we talked about him already, is Brandon Ayuk. He barely made it onto the list, and that's just because it was a struggle here, because I wanted to put. He's not in my honorable mentions because he sucks. I hate that he sucks. It's Jerry Jeudy, but I hate that Jerry Jeudy sucks. I was gonna put him at 30. I didn't, and then I'm like, he just doesn't deserve to be on the list, which sucks. And I put Brandon Ayuk at 30, and then the honorable mentions fell as they fell, right? But Brandon Ayuk, we talked about him already. He's a number 2 easily on any other team. I mean, even if the team doesn't have a clear-cut number 1, he could rise up to that occasion, right? He's got amazing hands, and his route running is just impeccable. I think that's like one of the biggest parts of his game. It's just his route running. I mean, how many times have you seen him just open in the end zone? Just clearly open, just sitting there, and they're like, oh, touchdown, easy. Like everyone else is paying attention to George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, whatever, Christian McCaffrey. So he's going to get the nod off to like one of the lesser players on the defense, right? I don't know. 30, it seems like a good spot. If he was on a different team, I think he'd be higher, a lot higher, but it's unfortunate that it's only 30, right?
Yeah. I mean, with a player like Brandon Ayuk as your number 2, that's pretty nice, and that's why you had a guy like Lance got injured. Brock Purdy walked in there and was fine. That's why, right? Like you have those 3 guys that Tanner and I have been talking about the drum the whole episode. We won't continue to repeat their names for the Niners, but you have those 3 guys who are top options in the NFL, and then you have Brandon Ayuk as your number 2, who, like Tanner said, is a really good route runner, relies on his speed. I do need to see him improve on his hands a little bit. I did see him drop important ones this past season, but at the same time, if that's your only knock, and I'm really grasping at straws there, you know what I mean? I just want to see Brandon Ayuk. I can't even say be open more. I just want him to get the ball more. As a fantasy option, I think great as a flex player. But if he's on any other team, yeah, he's easily another number 2 wide receiver with more production. I would put him in terms of like a Devontae Smith wide receiver production wise. But, I think Devontae Smith is a little bit above him in terms of like levels, but still not a bad player at all, right? Brandon Ayuk's a great number 2, and the San Francisco 49ers continue to have that offense. That you just massively just threw off your list is my number 29, Jerry Jeudy.
Oh, there he is.
Well, the thing about it is for me, and I'm glad you said that because I agree. This was the one player couldn't put in honorable mentions because I didn't think he deserved to be in honorable mentions. I didn't know if I could put him on this list. The reason I put him on this list is I think if Russ wouldn't have had his meltdown of a season last year, I mean, he was still decent last year. He was still decent. He was a bright spot on that offense at times. And if anybody's a bright spot on that offense, not bad, right? Like, you know what I mean? It's not bad. If you're a bright spot on that offense, it's really, really hard to even, do that, right? So I think this year, I think Jerry Jeudy is going to have a great season in terms of production. I think he's going to have a really, really good season. Over 1,000 yards. I'm projecting him over 1,000 yards this year because I think Russ is going to get right. I don't know if Russ is going to get back to Russ, but I do think that he's going to become way, way better this season. Like I said, I'm completely projecting that, right? I'm projecting that he's going to be good. This is a guy I think is going to hit this season. Only fantasy wise, would I take him? But not anywhere sooner than that. I am that Russ starts cooking this season. And if Russ starts cooking, Pocket at his number 2 position was way better. You know what I mean? No disrespect to Jerry Jeudy, but coming in way better. So that's my thing. That's why Jerry Jeudy's on there. Who's your number 29?
I mean, just going on Jerry Jeudy a little bit. I'm glad you put him on the list because I didn't. I wanted to, but it's just hard given that he hasn't had that much production, overall throughout his NFL career. Now, granted he's had, very below average, honestly, quarterback play, which sucks, but I thought he was going to be really good coming into this last season with Russ going over there, but obviously Russ didn't go over there. He just was in Seattle the entire time. But it's just one of those things, like when you think about it, you're like, oh, Trey Duty's pretty good. And then you look at the stats and he's like, oh, he's really not that good. But it's like, I don't know. I just don't think he's been given like the proper quarterback play. It's hard. It's kind of like we're talking about like with George Pickens or like with Deontay Johnson with like the Steelers, right? It's just like there's like average quarterback play. If they were on like a bigger, better team, they would have bigger, better stats, right? So I don't know. That's like my big knock on him. I wanted to put him in honorable mentions, but I just thought the other ones were better. So my number 29 though, great segue, is Deontay Johnson. And for a lot of the other reasons we talked about, you can utilize him anywhere on the field. He's like a Swiss Army knife. And we talked about him kind of extensively, so I won't go too much into detail, but he's a great player. He's fun to watch, and honestly, he's like a sleeper fantasy pick every single year. So nobody ever touches him, and just grab him. He'll get you points, I promise.
Exactly. He's been on my fantasy team since he's been in the league. I was the one that picked him up off the waiver wire, and every year toward the end of the draft, I take him, and I don't understand why nobody does. He's a great player, like you said, and yeah, I've already hit on him. Who is your number 28?
My number 28 is someone we touched on a little bit. It is Chris Olave, and I like him a lot.
Wow.
Yeah.
20. You have Chris Olave at 28. I think
Yes.
that may be the biggest jump that we may have. I have him so high on this list.
Just wait.
Interesting.
That's the thing. These lists are going to be completely different because it's just how you view these receivers. But I kind of when I made together my list, I kind of have like it's spoiling it a little bit, not a lot, but it's like kind of like reputation and like accolades kind of over like, these younger players, right? Because I haven't seen what they can do fully yet. Chris Olave on the Saints was like one of the only bright spots if you watched those games last year. Honestly, he probably would have been like the rookie of the year if Garrett Wilson wasn't, right? He played really well, and I picked him up like in the latter half of the season for fantasy, and he got me a lot of points, and he saved me a couple games. So I'm a big fan of his. I think he's raw. I think the thing about his game is that he's just really raw, and if he can get someone to help him coach him and someone to help him get better and better and better, I think he's going to be a really good receiver. And who else to make him better than like Michael Thomas, right? Michael Thomas is in that room, and he's going to help make him better. I like Chris Olave. I don't think he's like I think he could go a little higher, but I don't think it's like a lot higher, just given the other receivers on this list and what I know they can do and what I know that they have done in the past.
I mean, and that's totally fine, right? I'm clearly a list off of guys that I think are going to pop off more this season. Not necessarily. I mean, yes, respect is up there. Once we get to the top 10, I think our top 10 is going to be probably pretty similar. But you're right? Between number 11 and number 30, you could interchange a lot of those guys. I mean, I'm looking at number 17 right now, and number 27 and 17 on my list really aren't that different.
Mm-hmm.
And there's tiers in wide receivers. There's 10 wide receivers in this league. Just heads and shoulders. I mean, realistically, looking at my list, looking at my top 10, I wouldn't say that the top 10. I would say there's a top maybe 8 wide receivers in this league right now that you just can't.
Yeah.
Nobody can argue. Everybody else should really.
I think it's like top 8.
Yeah.
I really do.
Top 8. I really don't think you can argue outside that. But way to mine. My number 28 is Michael Thomas. I had to put him on the list just because what he did, in terms of production recently, not the best, but I had to put him on here just like I had to put in Hop. I had to put in nice Carlon. I had to put in those guys because Michael Thomas, who not only comes in, but if you watched him when he played and he wasn't injured and he was on the field, he looked like Michael Thomas.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He came back and hooped. I know Dad got him in fantasy and beat me one week literally because he went off for an insane game, like old Michael Thomas numbers with Drew Brees, dude. But yes, you're 100% right. Michael Thomas is the best mentor Chris Olave can possibly have. Too much just because Olave, as I've been watching him, since Ohio State, him and Garrett Wilson argue both of those players. It's hard to argue one way or the other. When I had him coming out of college, he was a little bit better. A little bit better hands. But the thing with Chris Olave for me is I actually had Chris Olave down on Garrett Wilson. So a lot of people thought they were interchangeable in terms of NFL experts around the league. I actually kind of thought Garrett Wilson was on a tier of his own, and then I'd put Chris Olave down. In list, it's reflected as such, but collegiate level, which is very nice to see because wide receivers, very good route running wide receivers in the collegiate level, sometimes you don't see them get their hands around fast enough, which therefore leads to more drop passes, which is what I've noticed, kind of the trend that I've seen for guys that aren't really working out in the NFL. That's kind of consistently within their tape. But yeah, I mean, Chris Olave is a great guy on the field. I think he's going to get signed to a second contract. I think Derek Carr is going to just throw it to him pretty much every play that he can when he's not throwing it to Alvin Kamara. So, I mean, I have him ranked a little bit higher in my opinion, but I've also been watching this kid for I don't know how long, and Derek Carr sticks on one guy.
Hey,
this is going to be his guy.
I'm all right with
Alvin
that.
Kamara is, I think, suspended. I think he's going to be suspended pretty soon. I'll go ahead and jump to my number 27 just because we did talk about him a little bit earlier. Calvin Ridley. I have to put him on number 27. The only reason I'm doing this is because they may not a whole Instagram page full of just Jacksonville Jaguars OTAs, training camps, and Calvin Ridley specifically running routes. I don't know how. Dude, he looks really good. He looks really good. And I wanted to go read. I've read a lot of articles about this guy, and I think he's going to have a breakout season, if you can really even say that. He was literally let go because he gambled on on the games. Now he's back in the league. He's served his time, apologized for what he's done, and once again going to one of the best quarterbacks in the league with Trevor Lawrence. The best young quarterback in the league if I'm going to start my franchise today. Yeah, I think this guy walks in, like I said earlier, is going to be a number 2 wide receiver for 3 games. And then I think games 4 on, he's going to be a number 1 wide receiver. The only question I have is tank. What does he have in the tank, right? Like, what does he have conditioning-wise? Has he been keeping up conditioning-wise? Everything that I've seen, he looks shredded. So I think everything for him this year in Jacksonville. And that division, no disrespect, the Texans aren't that great. The Colts aren't that great. You know what I mean? There's not that many teams in that division that are even going to compete. And when you don't have teams in your division that are competing against you, there's 6 wins. But I mean, it's not that hard to make the playoffs when your division's not that great. So they need to take advantage of this, and they have, because they were the only team in the NFL that signed Calvin Ridley. So let's see what he does this season. You know what I mean? I'm taking him in fantasy if I get the opportunity.
Yeah, easily. I mean, I don't think you can have a better situation to go into if you're like he's coming off of his suspension, right, and he hasn't played in a year, specifically in like a starting position. I mean, it's the Jacksonville Jaguars. The division is basically yours. There's a lot of spots on offense that you could be in. Like you have Evan Ingram and you have Christian Kirk that are going to carry a lot of the load for you, and ETN, and you have Trevor Lawrence. Like it's one of the best situations in the NFL to come back on, right after a mistake probably on his part.
Absolutely. I can't wait to see what he does this season. Who do you got as your number 27?
My number 27, and this is where the list starts to get like, dang, I can't believe they're this low. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And it's Mike Williams. I can't believe he's this low. But everyone who I have above him, I would say I probably put above him. I really like Mike Williams, but I don't know. He's obviously the number 2 behind Keenan Allen in that system, and he has been for a while. And don't get me wrong, he has like good games every once in a while, but he doesn't shine when Keenan's on the field, which sucks. Like he does, he catches touchdowns, he gets plays here and there, but it's kind of like an even split between those two, right? So I like Mike Williams a lot. He's really talented, and he can go up and he get the ball, and he can make tough catches, and he's getting paid a lot of money, and that's always good to see if you're a receiver, because I like them getting paid. But he's a good receiver. He's at 27. It's nuts to see him at 27, but I don't. Everyone I have above him I think, deserves to be above him.
I get it. I mean, Mike Williams is a clear-cut number 2 on that team. Keenan Allen's gotten 1,000-yard seasons for so many years. Now Mike Williams can add that to the list too because he did, and part of that reason is because of Herbert's elevation in his play year over year, right? Year over year, he gets better. The thing with Mike Williams is that he's always been a red zone guy, always been a guy that's going to go up and get the ball and really just that's about it, right? You don't really see anything else. You don't see crisp route running. You don't see a ton of speed. You don't see a ton of break in the routes. He's just going to run straight and he's going to get the ball. Each year, he's also gotten better when he came out of Clemson because he used to hoop with Trevor Lawrence, dude. My goodness. I think Deshaun threw to him too. When you have a guy has that good of quarterbacks, that good of coaching at that early, it's pretty hard to not be that good of a player. You know what I mean? Because his body is just, he's so big. You know what I mean? He's not, like I said, he's not the fastest guy. He's faster than Keenan, but he's not the fastest guy. You know what I mean? Mike Williams is a guy that's going to just go up and get the ball, and that's all he's going to do. And that's all he needs to do. Mike Williams be on another team? I don't know. You know what I mean? I don't know. Mike Williams is very high on my list, but if you have to put him somewhere that's not behind Allen, who's, like you said, taking a lot of the load off of his shoulders, but Allen got injured. Mike Williams did step in and still play very well.
He did.
So that's something else that's good to see. And Keenan, you know what I mean, starting to get up there with age. So who knows how much longer Keenan Allen's going to actually be there, but to have Mike Williams on this list. I'll touch on him a little bit later because I'm going to talk about him, but have to have him on this list. Jumping to my number 26 is another guy to put him on here. Production hasn't been the greatest, but he's a number 1 wide receiver on his team, and it's obvious. Michael Pittman Jr., the wide receiver out of the Colts. I have to put him on this list, and realistically, you could stick him on a lot of NFL teams, and he's probably a number 2 wide receiver. This is the definition of a guy who is not going to beat you with route running, but he is going to beat you with like determination and the ability to go up and get the ball. A lot of these guys that we're talking about are go up and getting the ball. There's a reason the message of this podcast and this episode is because these guys are missing that one box. You get to the top 10, you get to the top 15, you don't have a box that you're necessarily missing. So some of these guys, you know what I mean? Like with Michael Pittman, I would like a little bit more speed on him. You know what I mean? If Michael Pittman just shaved off, 0.4 of a second on his 40, I think he'd be a different player. It's crazy to say, be a different player, but still clear-cut number 1 on that team. And there's no other option other than Jonathan Taylor, and you can't tell me there's another option that you're trying to throw the ball to. So Michael Pittman's going to be there year in and year out, and take him in fantasy because, like I said, only option on that team.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. I completely agree so much that he's also my number 26. I have my Michael Pittman there, and it's for the exact same reason. I mean, I watched a game this past year where they played the Denver Broncos, and they stuck Pat Surtain on him, and it was almost like it was a battle the entire game. Don't get me wrong, but the ball was thrown to Michael Pittman a lot. Like, it's not that they didn't throw him the ball in that game, and obviously it's one game out of however many he's played, but in this game that I watched, they threw him the ball, and he made a lot of the catches. It's just they were like 5 yards, 6 yards, 7 yards, nothing crazy. It's nothing like down the field. He's not getting like these huge like 30-yard bombs. Also granted his quarterback play hasn't been great the past couple of years, but there's just not like a lot there, Like he's not going to go down the field and kind of like get open like we were talking about. If he can get some more speed, he can catch the ball by, like you said, sheer will and determination because he's right there. The ball doesn't have to travel very far. So it's interesting to see because I feel like he's a great receiver. You look at the stats, it's like, yeah, he's pretty good, but then you watch him play and it's like, well, he gets a lot of looks, but they're not a lot of quality looks. I don't know. I'd be curious to see what he would do on like a different team, right, where he gets like more help, better quarterback play. I don't know. I think he can be really good, but right now I'm just not seeing it.
I mean, it's hard to see it, and when you have a quarterback that's coming in like Anthony Richardson, it's going to be harder to see it because that kid needs to
Yeah.
work on his accuracy. He's great outside the pocket, but he's probably not going to see the field this year. So you're going to see inconsistent quarterback play once again. The fans are going to be calling for him to start, but just give him a year, let him learn to get a little bit more accurate before he jumps in. But yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens, right? Who is your number 25?
My number 25 is the newly added Dallas Cowboys receiver Brandon Cooks, and I have him at 25 just out of sheer respect. I mean, this dude has gotten 1,000-yard seasons a lot. I don't know exactly the stats, but it's a lot. He, back in when he was playing with New Orleans, he got 1,000-yard seasons with Drew Brees. Hopefully, he'll get one with Dallas and Dak Prescott. I hope it happens, but he's the definition of consistency. I saw him play on the Texans, and still he was like easily like we talked about Christian Kirk earlier. He looked like the best player on the offense. It was just clear. He made these catches that were really good, and he would just run past dudes. You just gone, goodbye. Touchdown, easy. And he didn't have the best quarterback play, of course, which struggled with his numbers and stuff like that. But he's a good player, man. I really like Brandon Cooks. I'm glad that he found himself in Dallas, and I think he's going to play a lot better there. I really do.
Was a really good signing, and I think it's exactly what the Cowboys needed. Like I was just saying, just talking about it, he is going to step in and immediately play that burner role. So, if you're looking for somebody that's probably, some games going to have 2 catches for 52 yards, that may be Brandon Cooks, but you're also going to look at games where Brandon Cooks has 4 catches for 198 yards and 2 touchdowns, right? Because Brandon Cooks, that's what he does. He just gets past guys.
Yeah.
And when you have an offense as electric and as explosive and as good as Dallas's offense, top 5 offense in the NFL, in my opinion, it's very hard to have to cover CeeDee Lamb without the safety, right? You have to take a safety away with CeeDee. You can't not.
Mm-hmm.
Who gets the other safety? Are you going to throw it to Michael Gallup on Michael Gallup's side to where one-on-one, I'm going to throw him the rock pretty much every time, depending on who's covering him? And Dak does that a lot. Cornerback, you're not supposed to be on your guy for that long. Brandon Cooks, you're going to be looking past. So a very, very exciting offense. Very exciting offense. And it was the one position that I think Dallas needed to upgrade a little bit on speed-wise. And they did. And they brought in a guy not only that has the speed, but has the literal background. This is what I do. I walk into a new team. I go get very close to 1,000 yards, if not 1,000 yards, and I just throw my burners on and go in second gear, the second, third, fourth, fifth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th gear the whole time.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So that's exactly what you need. I just need to see him stay healthy. I need to see Dak actually hit him down the field and not overthrow him, because this guy's going to be pretty hard to overthrow. Jumping to my number 25, put him on this list just because of how many fantasy points he's gotten. Tanner literally beat me last year in the fantasy championship because of this player. The wide receiver out of Seattle that is not DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett. This kid
I love him.
is so reliable
I
out
love him.
of either I think Kansas State. I think he's out of Kansas State, either Kansas or Kansas State. Kid, call him a kid because he is a kid. He looks like a kid. He plays like a man. It's incredible. Every year with Russ, you pick him up. You don't necessarily, well, you started to draft him after 1 year with playing with Russ, but you draft him in the later half. You know what I mean? Exactly kind of like a Deontay Johnson guy. But then this man goes off for 200 plus in a game. You know what I mean? This guy has a ceiling that a lot of number 2s don't touch. And yes, he's a number 2. He's always been a number 2. Doug Baldwin, you know what I mean? And now he's behind DK Metcalf. He's always been a number 2, but he has been the most consistent number 2 he's been in the league, in my opinion. So, last year he did, I would say fell off a little bit, but he really didn't. You know what I mean? Geno Smith still threw him the rock quite a bit. Not necessarily as productive as those years with Russ, but still easily a number 2 on that team. Kenneth Walker and DK Metcalf and a Geno Smith that's hitting on all cylinders right now. At least 3 more years of great production as long as Geno's there.
I completely agree. Like you said, he was on my fantasy team, and I got to watch him a lot. And Tyler Lockett, is the definition of consistency. I mean, I can't tell you how many games I watched where I was like, okay, we're getting down to the nitty gritty here. I need a touchdown, and I need it. I need it badly, you know. And there he goes. He gets a touchdown. He just catches one. It doesn't matter. That might be his only like big play of the game, but he's like contributing. He's getting a touchdown. He's getting points on the board. He's like converting third downs. It's like that. That's like his role. He's like that clutch kind of player. When someone needs to step up, Tyler Lockett will step up. I watched at the end of this past season, he had like a broken finger or something like that. And everyone was like, oh, I don't know if he's going to play. And I think I told this story already on this podcast, but I forgot and I left him in my lineup. And I had him play. And he actually played the game with like a broken finger or something like that. And he caught a touchdown in a couple passes. And I was like, how do you do that? It's broken. Doesn't it hurt? He just
That's painful.
It's painful. Like he just doesn't care. And he's just very, very good with his hands. He's excellent route runner and he's fast. And that's just it with DK as his pair. It's like the almost the exact opposite, except DK is also fast. You know, he's big, he's fast, and he's strong. And Tyler Lockett is like not very big. He's pretty fast, and he's got great hands. You know, it's like a 1A 1B kind of situation, which is crazy to say because Tyler Lockett is getting up there in age, but I love him. He's a great receiver, and he absolutely deserves to be at that spot.
Oh, yeah, and one of the best over-the-shoulder catchers that I've ever seen in my entire life in the NFL. Jumping to number 24, one of the wide receivers on the Cincinnati Bengals. This is T. Higgins.
Yeah.
You have to put him on this list. If T. Higgins was on any other team, I really do think that T. Higgins competes for number one in terms of if it just wasn't Jamar Chase, you know what I mean, or somebody like Justin Jefferson. I think Jamar Chase is top in this league. I said it a bunch, but when you have a guy like T. Higgins, I mean, he's fast, he's big, he's strong, he's a good route runner. He's very good at everything. The fact that he's in number two, some games number three behind Boyd because Boyd will get going is unbelievable. And there's a reason that the Bengals have already been to the Super Bowl and this team is so young, right? There's a reason. These wide receivers are so good and he continues to get better and better each season. Who is your number 24, Tanner?
My number 24 is someone we've talked about. It's Keenan Allen. I think he deserves to be on this list. I think he deserves to be talked about. Obviously, he's not higher because he's getting up there in age and he's started to take probably a little bit of a step back. We saw him this past year with some injuries. I think he only played like 10 games or something like that, which of course let the room open for Mike Williams to shine. But Keenan Allen, again, is kind of one of those old veterans who is just consistent, and he's just going to get touchdowns. He's going to catch the ball in clutch situations, right? He's one of those guys that's going to step up a lot like a Tyler Lockett in a different way, but he's a staple on this Chargers offense, and he has been for a long time. And through different quarterbacks and different, playbooks and play styles, he's still like succeeded, and you still see him as a viable fantasy pick, which is kind of crazy. You know what I mean? Like I don't know how old he is, but he's getting up there in age, and he has taken a step back, but it's not that big of a step.
Yeah, I mean, I think Keenan Allen with me, I have him a little bit higher on the list. I'll hit on him today. I'll give you that little bit of information, but he's definitely not on the next episode. He is. I do it on today, but I keep him and Mike Williams in there. I'm not going to give away the spot on the list. They're right next to each other. It's really hard for me to interchange those guys, and it's really hard for me to not have those guys not in the top 20, just because guys have gotten so many 1,000-yard seasons. And yes, you saw Keenan Allen get injuries last year, which did suck. But at the same time, when he was on the field, he was extremely productive. When he wasn't injury ridden, right? Like even when he was on the field, there were some games last year where you could tell something was nagging him and he was just trying to go. He was fully healthy 100% last year. You saw Keenan Allen, you know what I mean? But yes, all those injuries, a full off season. I think he's going to come back and hoop this season. I think Mike Williams got paid and Keenan's going to need to get paid again shortly. So, you have to kind of look at that end too. And it's Justin Herbert's guy. You know what I mean? That's Justin Herbert's guy. That's Keenan Allen. He gives him the ball every single down that he's open. He's going to give him the ball. So that's why I got Keenan Allen just a little bit higher on mine. Go ahead and jump to your number 23rd.
My number 23, we just talked about him, is T. Higgins. I really do believe that he could be a number one if he wasn't on the Cincinnati Bengals, just because Jamar Chase steals the spotlight, right? I mean, look at the season before Jamar Chase got there with T. Higgins when he was technically the number one, right? He did play really well, and I think he played pretty damn well. He was a rookie, of course, and that came with some growing pains, but he's still like a viable option if you're like playing fantasy or something like that. He's going to get looks, he's going to get receptions, probably not to the degree of Jamar Chase, but like he on any given Sunday, I think he can go off. He can get 3 touchdowns, 300 yards. I don't know. I mean, if he's crazy enough, he can do it, right? I've seen him do it. I've seen him become that number one receiver on that day. And I mean, if he's in his peak form, he could be the best receiver on the field. If Jamar Chase is lacking, right? But I don't know. T. Higgins, he's an amazing receiver, and do not sleep on him at all.
I mean, T. Higgins is a great receiver. I've already hit on him a little bit, so I won't go too in depth. But you nailed it. You said all you needed to say. He's a number one on most teams, on some teams. Sorry, on some teams, he's a number one on some teams, and the only reason he doesn't get the ball more is because Jamar Chase is open even when he's covered, right?
Yeah.
So definitely. Jump into 23 on my list. I have Devontae Smith, receiver out of Philadelphia. I have to put him 20s because he is still a number 2. You know what I mean? The fact that we're talking about number 2 wide receivers right here in the 20s, it's really funny. Shows that teams that draft really good players take a couple. You know what I mean? I got a really good running back. I'm going to take another one, like the Packers, right? Got Aaron Jones. I'm going to bring in AJ Dillon. Okay, whatever. You know what I mean? You got these guys like Devontae Smith was already there, and then they brought in AJ Brown. So Devontae Smith has been there a little bit longer than AJ Brown has, but Devontae Smith played with Jalen Hurts in Alabama. The chemistry's there. It has not stopped at all. And Devontae Smith, I think, is probably the best number 2 wide receiver in the league, if not number 2 or 3 at the absolute least. You know what I mean? He's so good.
He's so good.
Okay. And he's so fast, and his route running is so crisp. Doesn't look open. And then all of a sudden, 79 yards later, you're sitting there going, well, there's another touchdown on the Cowboys from Devontae Smith. So, yeah, he's absolutely on this list. Next year will probably be in the top 20.
Yeah, I think he just gets outshined, by AJ Brown, and it sucks. But like AJ Brown had a fantastic year, and you can't put that against him. And Devonta Smith silently had a pretty good year too. It's like as a number 2, that's probably one of the best in the league, right? You could put him up there with one of the best number 2s, probably right next to T. Higgins, as we were talking about. So good placement. I love it. I really hope he continues to develop because, I mean, the dude's like a freaking Heisman Trophy winner. Like, when was the last time we saw that with a receiver, right? That's so cool.
It's awesome, right? Yeah, that's awesome. So, yeah, absolutely. My number, did you hit 23 yet?
Yes, I just did. Yeah.
Okay. My number 22, I'll go. Then you go ahead and hit your 22 and 21. But my 22 is, okay, I'm going to get some heat for this one.
Okay.
Some heat for this one, but this one is there's really no other option on that team other than a running back. Christian Watson, the wide receiver out of the Green Bay Packers. I have to put him this high because Jordan Love has literally nobody else to throw the ball to, and if you watched him the later half of last season, oh my, if he can dial that in for a half of a season, he's a top 30 wide receiver in the league. He is. Realistically, in terms of production, he is. Sorry, he is. He dialed it in for like 9 games last season. Best fantasy player in the league in those last 9 games. He had like 8 touchdowns or something crazy like that. You know what I mean? He would have won Rookie of the Year too if he would have done something the first half of the season. You know what I mean? But he just didn't. So, I don't know, man. I think this guy is primed for a massive season. I see over 1,000 yards. I'm thinking like 10 or 12 TDs, something nuts. Just because who are they going to throw the ball to the red zone? They don't have anybody.
Nobody.
They literally do not have a single person on that team. No disrespect to anybody on that team, but they handing the rock off to AJ Dillon or Aaron Jones, there's not a whole lot of options. I'm sorry. Adam Lazard, sorry, he's gone with the Jets now. You know what I mean? There's
Everyone's
not a lot of
gone.
options there. What are you going to do? And you have no idea what's happening with that quarterback. You have no clue. So
that's what scares me.
Take that pick with a grain of salt, right? I think he's going to be really good this season. It could also blow up right in my face. You know what I mean? I'm just going to say that right now. That's the one guy on this list. Question mark on this list for me.
I think that's fair. I mean, he definitely exploded in in the better half of the season, right? I don't know. The thing that worries me is I don't know if that was because of Aaron Rodgers and he just kind of like made him that good. Because I mean, you saw the issues Aaron Rodgers had with his receivers in the beginning of the season, right? No one could catch the ball, no one was open. That he was delivering good balls, they just fell right through their hands, right? Obviously that gave him a lot of confidence. Christian Watson from being thrown the ball from Aaron Rodgers. Like, I don't know is my biggest question. I don't know if Jordan Love can make him into that kind of player, right? I don't know if he can continue that success. So that's where I'm really worried. He's not on my list, but I absolutely see what you're coming from or where you're coming from. It makes a lot of sense. But moving right along, my number 22, I won't hit him on a bunch. Tyler Lockett. That's where he sits. He's my boy. He's everyone's boy. He better be your boy, or you're just not very very smart, I guess. He's been he's been torturing defenses for like a while now. I don't know how you don't know his name if you don't, but he's really good. He's really good. Who is your number 21?
This one hurts me. This one hurts me because like it hurts me because higher, he could also be lower. Because this is a player that hasn't really had a lot of production, and a guy that I talk about with one of my really good buddies, Zach, who you know, Tanner, love that guy. He's an Eagles fan, almost perfect, but he's an Eagles fan. And I've talked a lot about this player with him, DJ Moore.
Okay.
It's so hard to put him list because if you look at what he's done over his career, it's somewhat impressive. But then you watch games. If you've watched the Carolina Panthers, I know it's been hard. Watch the Carolina Panthers with DJ Moore, and you were one of the unfortunate goers who drafted him pretty early one year, and he did nothing. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's really hard because it's hard to put somebody above Tyler Lockett on this list that disappears completely in games. Completely disappears in games. But here's the thing. Chicago needs a wide receiver. My gosh, is that a perfect fit? If that doesn't scream A.J. Dillon 2.0 perfect fit, or sorry, A.J. Brown, the Eagles perfect fit. This is a perfect fit for the Chicago Bears. Perfect fit. This is Justin Fields, wide receiver. Guy that is going to get the ball out of trouble. That's what DJ Moore does. Because he caught probably 15 interceptions when he was playing for Carolina. I watched it. It was horrible. It was just so boring to watch. You know what I mean? But watch what's on in the NFL, right? you got to watch what's on at that time. So I think DJ Moore's there just because I think he's easily going to have over 1,000 yards because he is Justin Fields' number one, and Justin Fields doesn't necessarily have two or a number three that is going to come in and be consistent as DJ Moore could be.
Yeah, I think you said it perfectly. I mean, he just gets his quarterbacks out of trouble. That's what he did in Carolina, right? So, I mean, I don't know what that says about Justin Fields, but he's going to Chicago, and hopefully they're going to do well. I think they will do well. He is higher on my list, just because I think he will do better. But the thing about like DJ Moore is, like you said, he disappears, and then he'll randomly go off for like 200 yards and 2 touchdowns in a game, and then it's like, oh, DJ Moore's back, and then like next week he'll be 2 catches for 14 yards, and it's like, bro, what happened? I don't know. It's just inconsistency. It really is. I hope he gets right. But moving on to my 21, it is Amon-Ra St. Brown for the Lions. Now, this might be a little low, but I kind of like it here because I think he's a really young receiver. He's really raw. No pun intended. But he's been like the only kind of receiver that they've had, on that Lions offense. Jameson Williams, he's been getting into trouble. He hasn't really seen the field a lot. So the ball just keeps going back to Amon-Ra St. Brown. And he's been taking up the mantle nicely. He's been, stepping up to the occasion. I like what I've seen. I really like him.
Yeah, I mean, he is the one wide receiver on this list that I can honestly say I haven't drafted. It's kind of shows you how much fantasy football I've played, and also probably another reason why you should listen to this pod, especially during football season, because we got some really great fantasy football picks. Amon St. Brown is higher on my list. I won't say how much higher on my list, but watching a wide receiver for the Detroit Lions is really hard for me personally. Just to watch Detroit Lions play is hard for me because I'm used to old Matthew Stafford and Calvin Johnson. Man, it's hard to watch a franchise that you're not throwing to a guy like Calvin Johnson, especially he could probably still be there right now, which is a really crazy part because he retired so young. He retired before he was 30 years old, which is crazy to think about. This guy makes me want to watch Detroit Lions football again.
Yeah.
So does their coach, and so did last season's performance. You know what I mean? I'm done shitting on the Detroit Lions. But the thing is with Detroit, Brown, nobody saw this coming. Nobody saw him to come in and not only be a number one, but be a number one. Top 10 fantasy production last year. And if you look at all the categories, dude, incredible player. And Jared Goff is ripping him the rock every time. So there's a reason he's very high on my list. I don't know a lot of wide receivers that can step into that situation and play that well. Now,
that's fair.
Jared Goff does have a lot of time behind that offensive line. We did touch on that last episode. I don't know, man. If you're putting up those kinds of numbers and you look at what they've done since Calvin, that's hard to argue to not put him on this list. Jumping to my number 20, this guy, Amari Cooper, the wide receiver out of Cleveland Browns. I had to put him on this list just because I didn't know this. Last year, he was a top 15 fantasy wide receiver. I didn't know if you know that. Last season, he was. Didn't think he was, but he definitely was. When I looked at his numbers, like, huh, okay, yeah, all right.
He had over 1,000 yards.
Yeah, exactly. And again, always a quiet wide receiver. Even in the Cowboys, even he was number one option in the Cowboys, he was still getting quiet number ones. You know what I mean? Number one wide receiver, 1,000-yard seasons. But you have to put in Amari Cooper. He's still the best route runner in the league, and he's going to get open for that reason. I think Deshaun Watson is going to actually play football this season and start throwing the ball with his eyes open this time and become a better quarterback like he used to be in Houston and not have that massive price tag be hurting a lot of the Cleveland fan base. They brought him in for a reason, and that's to win football games, and they have Amari Cooper, who is a number one on pretty much any NFL team, and he's playing at a very high level, and he is getting up there with age, but when you're that good at route running, especially at the wide receiver position, it's not only that you don't take a ton of hits, you know where to catch the ball and where to fall, and that's what Coop does best. So I see Coop being in the league until Deshaun is done in Cleveland, and then I see Coop going to another team and being a number two and a wide receiver number 3 after that. But the foreseeable future, I see Amari Cooper being a wide receiver 1, and I see him easily having over 1,000 yards this season and could potentially jump into the top 10 wide receivers this whole year if Deshaun Watson hits like he did when he was in Houston.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. It really is hard for me to say that Amari Cooper is consistent because, like, when you watch him play, like when he plays for the Raiders, when he played for the Cowboys, and now when he's playing for the Browns, it's like that he's just like plagued with like drops, just drop footballs and just like slight imperfections that kind of like plague his game. But everywhere he's gone, he's made an impact and he's made big plays and he's gotten like over 1,000 yards and his stats have been really good. So like by the stats, he's awesome. But like with Amari Cooper, it's always, I want to see more. You know what I mean? I want him to elevate to like a top 5, in the NFL because I think he could do it. He's got like the potential. You've seen like flashes of it, and he's like almost up there, but sometimes it just kind of falls short. And you saw that you didn't see that a lot in Cleveland because he didn't really have a quarterback to throw to. It was more or less just him making plays out of nothing. When he was in Dallas, that's what I was thinking. I want to see more. He was obviously a number 1, but he never really got up to like top 5 or anything like that. Same with when he was on the Raiders. That's kind of like the Cleveland problem. He was just making something out of nothing, right? But he's always doing something. He's always contributing a lot, and that's why I think he's a great receiver. I really do. But number 20, moving on to my number 20, is Garrett Wilson, and I think he's young. He's really young. He's the rookie of the year. He's got Aaron Rodgers throwing to him now, and I think the biggest knock on him was that he didn't have Aaron Rodgers throwing to him. He had Zach Wilson, and I can't remember the other one's name, but it's inconsistent quarterback play, right? And if you can get a ball to Garrett Wilson, that's just a little bit more in his bread box.
Mike White,
Mike White, that's what it was. Thank you.
old Dallas Cowboys quarterback.
He did play for the Cowboys. I think he lost like the
Oh.
third string job to somebody, but yeah, it's pretty bad. But yeah, Garrett Wilson, he just needs a better quarterback. I really think that's all it is. He had like I said, a great rookie season, and if the ball is just like a little bit more in his vicinity, he's gonna go up and make that catch. He's a great route runner, and he's fun to watch. You know, the Jets are finally fun to watch again. It's so cool.
Exactly. I love watching the Jets, man. I love watching the Jets even in the 2000s when they had Keyshawn Johnson. Man, watch when the Jets are good, it's fun. Football's fun. But absolutely, Garrett Wilson, he has to be on this list. If he's not on this list, you probably haven't played a whole lot of fantasy football, and I would recommend continue listening to the show. But
Dang.
Garrett Wilson right now, you know what I mean? You have a guy that is going to become a wide receiver, probably going to have close to 1,500 yards this season, because when Aaron Rodgers likes you, you're a really good route runner. Yeah, there's a guy that was named Jordy Nelson, another guy named Randall Cobb.
Devontae Adams.
Really good route runners, not the fastest. That's what Garrett Wilson is. You know what I mean? He's a very good route runner. He is a way speedier than both of those guys. But like Tanner said, very good route runner. My favorite Ohio State wide receiver out of Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. The Jets are just in an all-around better situation right now with Aaron Rodgers being there. I know you've been watching him rip it up, especially to Garrett Wilson. So I think Garrett Wilson this year is going to be a top 10 wide receiver personally. So I would take him early in fantasy if I were you. But jumping to my number 19, this is where I start to, I could switch some of these guys. I have to put him on the list just because when he is healthy, he doesn't necessarily have anybody throwing the rock, so I don't know how good he's going to be this season. Just in terms, I had to put him on this list. Chris Godwin, receiver out of Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I had to throw him on here just because when you have a guy that is as fast as Chris Godwin and you have a Mike Evans on the other side, to get 1,000 yards unless he's hurt or unless nobody's throwing him the ball. Not going to be hurt this year. Don't know who's going to throw him the ball this year, though. So that's my only caveat on that one. I don't know in terms of production what he's going to be, but recently with Tom Brady and even Jameis Winston, he's been very, very good and a top wide receiver in this league. So you got to put Chris Godwin up there, especially with that speed after the rock.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I had Chris Godwin on my list, I'll be honest. And then I started putting other names, and then I forgot to put him back on the list. So he's not on here. He should be on here, but I definitely forgot. He's just behind like Mike Evans. He's the number 2 in that team, and he does a really good job at it, right? It sucks that he's starting to get like injury prone and he's starting to not play as fast and he's losing a step and stuff like that, and that the team's kind of taking a tumble. So there's a lot of like downtrend with his stock and stuff like that. But I mean, when you watch him in that Brady Super Bowl and just that Brady Super Bowl season, it's like, gosh, he's so good. You know what I mean? I mean, he makes Mike Evans look like a superstar, and he is a superstar. Don't get me wrong, Mike Evans is a superstar, but he looks like the moon, and Chris Godwin is up here like the atmosphere of the earth. Like it's crazy. I mean, Chris Godwin is a fantastic receiver, and in his prime, top 10 in the league easily, and it wasn't even a question. I mean, you had to game plan for him, and if you didn't, he's gonna destroy you.
Exactly, 100%. Who's your number 19?
My number 19, we talked about him already, which is kind of interesting. You were saying like this guy's gonna have a breakout season. You think in like training camp, you've been watching him on, it's Calvin Ridley, but you've been watching him, stuff like that. And I was kind of surprised he wasn't higher on your list, but he's my number 19. I also think he's gonna have a breakout season. He's really talented. We saw what he did in Atlanta. Atlanta was kind of piss poor towards the little couple seasons he had, but I remember he had a really crazy season where he basically got himself on the map and everyone knew him, and it's Calvin Ridley and everybody else on that team. And, then the suspension happened and nobody's been talking about him. So I do think he's going to come back, and I think he's going to come back with a chip on his shoulder, especially on a new team and especially in a good system like we were talking about. There's like almost no chance he doesn't succeed,
way, not as much trouble, I don't think, but like Josh Gordon. You know what I mean? It's like Josh
Yeah,
Gordon. You come
actually.
in and you bring it, you pick up a player in fantasy off the waiver wire. It's like, who is this guy? In a couple, like Chris Godwin, you're like, who? Or, sorry, not Chris Godwin. So I just lost my train of thought completely. Who are we just talking about?
I also forgot his name, Josh.
That's horrible.
I know
That was terrible podcasting right
he,
there.
he played
Anyway,
for he played for Cleveland, and he was really good.
we may have to cut this part of the episode out. Our listeners are probably leaving by the groves right now. Anyway, we'll remember that.
Josh Gordon. Josh Gordon.
Josh Gordon. Thank you. He's
Wow.
just like Josh Gordon, right?
We're
You pick him
terrible.
up in fantasy, and you have no idea who this guy is, and then he is the most picked wide receiver the next year after that.
Mhm.
That's the same thing that's going to happen with Calvin Ridley. You're going to have people that either love him or you're going to have people that either hate him, right? Hate him, he performed at a really high level when he was playing. So I think he's going to walk in, continue to perform at that high level. And like I said already, he's got one of the best young quarterbacks in the league, throwing him the rock. Number 2 wide receiver, 3 games, 4 games. He's going to jump in and be a number 1 wide receiver. It's just take it to the bank now. You know what I mean? Jumping to number 18. This is a guy we talked about. I told you he was a little bit higher on my list. Mike Williams,
Okay.
wide receiver for the Los Angeles Chargers. I have to put him up here just because when we were talking earlier, we did talk about the times when Keenan Allen was injured. Yes, it wasn't a ton of games last season, but it was a decent amount of the games.
Yep.
So you really want to see what a guy does in those games. Every single he was there. Now, given it's pretty hard because they're also throwing to guys like Joshua Palmer, no disrespect, but number 3, number 4, that's Joshua Palmer, number 3, number 4. Mike Williams essentially jumps to number 1. Palmer jumps to number 2. You know what I mean? It's a little bit higher there, but Justin Herbert weathered the storm, and they even won some games. And Mike Williams was, I'm pretty sure, one of the players of the week, if not a couple times this past season with the performances that he has. So he's a young wide receiver that signed a big contract. He's number 2 on that team. This is where you want to see like a Michael Gallup. Right? I would want to see Michael Gallup be like Mike Williams right now for the Chargers, but he's just not there yet, right? Mike Williams is on another level. So that's why I think Mike Williams is in my top 20 and probably going to hit my top 15 next year.
Yeah, I really like the comparison with Michael Gallup. That makes a lot of sense. They're very similar in the way that they play the game. Looking back at I think Mike Williams absolutely could be higher on my list. I think he's really good, and I think the price tag is kind of what dogged me on him. You know, it's just kind of like he gets paid number 1 money, and he doesn't seem like a number 1, especially with Keenan being there. And I think of the I almost said San Diego Chargers. I think of the LA Chargers, and I think of Keenan Allen, right? And that's just kind of like that's his gig. That's what he does. So Mike Williams is kind of like a second thought, but absolutely, I mean, you're going to start seeing Keenan fall off a little bit more just because of age. And I really hope Mike Williams is going to start stepping up in that role. Like you said, we saw it a little bit this past year. I just want him to continue to do it, absolutely. If he does, that's going to be a big jump in my list for next year.
Who's your number 18?
My number 18, we talked about him, and it's his teammate in Calvin Ridley. It is Christian Kirk. I really like Christian Kirk. I thought he took a huge step this past season. I didn't think a lot of people didn't think he could do it. I was kind of on the fence, and when I saw him, at A&M, I was like, man, I just don't know, because like he was never like the player you talked about in the SEC, right? He's always like, he was A&M's number 1. He was never like the SEC, player of the week or anything like that. Like sometimes he might have made 1 or 2, I'm not sure, but he would never make headlines like that, like a Devonta Smith or people like from Alabama, right? But it kind of worried me because he never had that big school experience, but he filled into the role really nicely in Jacksonville, and he made a lot of really fun and cool catches, and he made football really fun to watch in Jacksonville. I mean, I can't tell you how many like routes I watched with that guy that were, kind of shorter routes, kind of like not intermediate routes, not long routes, just shorter routes that were ran really well, and he made really great contested catches on them. And I didn't know he had that part of the game to him, but he does, and he's developing it, and I think he's just going to keep getting better and better and better.
Christian Kirk, he came into the SEC, came into A&M, took the spotlight his freshman year, and then his sophomore year kind of went down a little bit. Then junior year was kind of decent, but freshman year was his breakout season, and everybody went, whoa, is this kid one of the number 1 wide receivers in the country? You know, in terms of when he got drafted, he was drafted higher, but not in terms of one of the highest wide receivers in the country. You know, he did play for A&M, who's a big school in the SEC, had all those SEC opponents come, played very well against those big opponents. And that's one of the main things that I watch whenever I watch college football players is if they're playing against Alabama, do they play well? I don't care if they play well against UT Martin, San Diego State. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't care. I really don't. If you don't play well against that team, then I have a lot more questions. You know, so that these guys are, you know, Division I athletes and everything, but I really want to see you play really well against these high level teams in these high level games. And Christian Kirk, that was sort of the knock on him in college, is that sometimes he would disappear in games. And in college, if he would disappear in a game, that's very scary because in the pros, that could be a little bit bigger gap in terms of games, right? Disappearing in one college game could mean 2 or 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 pro games, right?
Mm-hmm.
The other big knock on Christian Kirk was can he play anywhere other than the slot? Folks, I watched him in person. I watched him burn a lot of people on the outside. I watched him burn a lot of people from the slot. And he's finally doing the same thing because he has a quarterback who can throw him the rock and who can actually get him the ball in front. Christian Kirk needs a cannon, a quarterback. He needs somebody that has a cannon. It's just he needs a Josh Allen. He needs a Trevor Lawrence. He needs somebody that has a cannon, a Justin Herbert. He has to have a cannon because you need to be able to throw that wide receiver open.
Mm-hmm.
Because Christian Kirk, when he's route running, is a decent route runner. He's gotten better each year, but he doesn't have the type of separation typically that a small guy like he does, right? So how do you that? You get a quarterback that can throw you open. And Christian Kirk has elevated his game each year. I will give you that. Each year he has elevated his game. This past season, going into this season in Jacksonville, no way he touched this list. There's no way. There's no way he touched this list. But then he had this past season in Jacksonville. Not only me, but the entire fantasy world tried to pick him up and was like, okay, I made a mistake. I should have taken him a little bit higher. So absolutely, Christian Kirk needs to be on this list and is right now the number one in Jacksonville. At worst case, going to be the number 2.
Mm-hmm.
Going to my number 17, can't leave him off. Scary Terry. Come on.
Hey,
Come on. Wide receiver out of Washington. Yes, he's in the division. No, I'm a Cowboys fan. I'm not a homer against players. You know what I mean? I love Scary Terry. One of my favorite wide receivers in the league. He would have been higher, you know, but he kind of did not fall off last season, but didn't have the best season in terms of production. Ton of quarterback, you know, play there. Ton of running back play there. Ton of wide receiver play there. Ton of roster. I mean, coach was even going to get fired at one point. Like everything was happening in Washington last year. So last year is kind of a wash to me, but he still played pretty well. Definitely wasn't Scary Terry of old, but he's playing pretty well. And he's playing also a team that doesn't really utilize him that often. Like I want to see him be utilized more than he did, not last season, not even the season before, but the season before that. I mean, back when I don't even remember who the quarterback was. You know what I mean? It could have been Taylor Heineke. I don't know. You know what I mean? But he was throwing him the rock every single time, and he caught it every single time. So have to put Terry McLaurin up there. Dude won me 2 fantasy championships.
Yeah. I think I was researching a little bit, and I was looking at some stats, and I saw a crazy stat about Terry McLaurin, and it was like almost every time that the ball was thrown to him, the quarterback had like an average of like 104.5 passer rating when the ball was thrown to him, and I was like, that's stupid. I was like,
that's ridiculous.
That's stupid because I mean, when you think about the quarterbacks that he's had through his career, you can't because there aren't any. You know, like it's a quarterback carousel of who knows. Like it's nobody, and he still managed to solidify himself as a number 1 wide receiver, get like over 1,000 yards most seasons, and he makes these great catches that people around the league are like, dude, it's Scary Terry. He even has his own nickname. I mean, you don't have your own nickname if you're not good in the NFL. That's what I say. But I think he is higher on my list, I will be honest, but I just have a lot of respect for him because he's been doing this for a while with absolutely no help. It's kind of like that argument we were talking about. I don't remember the player, but it's kind of like he bails. I think it was DJ Moore. He kind of bails out the quarterback play. You know, the balls are like pretty okay, you know, accuracy wise, but he goes out and he gets those balls. He makes those athletic catches, and I can't tell you how many times he's burned the Cowboys on catches just like that. You know, just like Taylor Heineke is like off balance throwing in the pocket. You know, he just throws it up and then bam, scary Terry touchdown, and it's like, what? How did that even happen? That shouldn't have happened. But he's an amazing player. I really like watching him play. I kind of hope he doesn't stay in Washington though.
Yeah, 100%. Definitely want him to go somewhere other than the NFC East. Who is your number 17?
My number 17, I talked about him a little bit, but it's Mike Evans, baby. This dude is on lock for the Hall of Fame. I think he's put up like the most consecutive 1,000-yard seasons ever. It's like 11 or 12 or something like that. It's just consistency. That's kind of what you're going to start seeing once we get into these top wide receivers. Just consistency. They make the plays time in and time out. With Mike Evans, obviously he had Tom Brady at one point, but before that he had Jameis Winston, who was I think it was like the 30 for 30 season, which was 30 touchdowns and 30 interceptions, and he still managed to get like 1,000 yards in that offense.
Imagine leading the league in passing and then being a free agent. Just imagine that.
I know.
Williams led the league in passing and then went to New Orleans the next season. I can't believe that. And that's when Tom came in and just won a Super Bowl his first season. No big deal.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Obviously, you're starting to see the age on him, but I mean, he still looks really good. You can see it that there's not as big of a step in his game. He's kind of a little slower than he used to be, but he's still making those plays, and he's still better than a lot of the cornerbacks that he's going up against. He's really fun to watch. He's been in Tampa Bay for a long time. I don't know why he's still there, but he's making it work. And like I said, he's going to be a Hall of Fame player.
I mean, he's consistently been on the field and consistently getting 1,000-yard seasons every single season he's been in the NFL.
Yep.
You know what I mean? I actually was one of the very few folks whenever Johnny Manziel won the Heisman, a lot of that was Mike Evans. If you look at literally 60% of the passes that Johnny threw, they were to Mike Evans or in his general direction. Watched a lot of those catches he made. It was double, triple, and sometimes quadruple covered, and Mike Evans still came up with the rock. And he's done that again in the NFL. He's beaten double teams. He's beaten triple teams. He has been the most consistent player in the NFL since he's entered the league. And he's still at the exact same spot, and he's at the exact same pace that he has been since he entered the league, which is something that's really hard to do, right?
It's crazy to think about.
1,000 yards, that many 1,000 yards, it's insane. And he's such a good player, and it's awesome that he's from A&M. I got to see him at A&M. That was like very, very first semester. I got to see him and Johnny, but dude, captain, consistency.
Yep.
He's got himself a Super Bowl ring. He's going to continue to get the 1,000-yard seasons. He's going to continue to break the records of the franchise, and he's going to continue to break the records of all time. And like you said, he's going to have a Hall of Fame seat. And he's my number 16 wide receiver too. So, Perfect. My 16, he was your 17. My 16, he's the definition of go up and get the ball. He definitely lacks speed. Still going to go up and get the ball. He doesn't lack size. And's going to go up and get the rock. Former basketball player, you know what I mean? Very lanky guy. He uses his body and position it to get in front of cornerbacks and is the best in the league at doing it. Guys coming into the league should study because of what he's been able to do, especially if you have that bigger frame. Study that tape. Number 16.
My number 16 is Devonta Smith. He has made an appearance on my list. The only reason he's not higher is what we talked about earlier, because A.J. Brown is a Philadelphia Eagle. I mean, it's hard. When you look at him, you look at his resume, what he has done, he doesn't feel like a number 16 receiver in this league. He feels like he should be top 10, but it's just so stacked, in the top 10, top 15, whatever it is. It's so stacked. And Devonta Smith, I mean, I honestly think if he goes to another team, I think he'd be a number 1 right out the gate, because he has so much. His technique is very good. He has like that weird frame that everyone calls him the Slim Reaper, including me. But he makes it work. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter. He goes up. He's physical, despite what he looks like. He's a physical receiver. He can get hands on you at the line of scrimmage, and he can go up and make contested catches. I've seen him have athletic catches on the sideline. I've seen him have athletic catches in the end zone. He just does everything. He's a Swiss Army knife, kind of one of those players, and that's imperative to have at your number 2 position. A.J. Brown's kind of like that. He's going to go ball guy, and he's going to go and get the ball in the end zone. And then Devonta Smith, you're going to dump it off right here. And, I mean, maybe 15 yards down the field, throw a pass to him, he's going to be open. It's a perfect fit for Philadelphia. That offense is amazing. And hey, Odin.
If you're watching on YouTube, you get to see the pup behind me. Absolutely, man. And this was a great way to last player, right? Like we're gonna hit 15 through number 1 next episode, and Smith is a really good player to leave it off, right? Like you said, Devontae Smith is probably one of the best wide receivers in the league, number 2 wise. And he's been extremely consistent and been the main reason that Jalen Hurts hasn't struggled since he's been in the league. Once again, Devontae Smith almost won Rookie of the Year. You know what I mean? Got real close. And a large part of that is because of how productive he was. And he's continued to be productive at Alabama, continued to be productive in Philadelphia, and is the best number 2 wide receiver in the league.
Yeah.
Because when you have a wide receiver as good as him, number 2 position, that is that good at route running and that good at rack run after catchability, hard one to beat. And when you have Jalen Hurts, who is a classic, either could run out of the pocket or dump it off, that's the perfect guy to have on that offense. Also why Dallas Goedert is perfect. It's too. Philadelphia has built a team around Jalen without even realizing they're building it around Jalen. Of course, they realize they built it around Jalen. Just giving Philly fans shit here. But you have such a good team, and arguably the number 2 or number 3 offense in the NFC. I would between Philly and Dallas, it's really hard to interchange those two out. I think you can't touch San Francisco just because of all the names we mentioned, but Philly and Dallas right there are fighting for that number 2 and number 3 spot. We'll see who's the better wide receiver 2 this year out of Devontae Smith or Michael Gallup out of Dallas. I'm taking Devontae Smith personally, but yeah. maybe Michael Gallup makes that next jump, but absolutely. And any other points you want to hit on, Tanner, before we end this thing?
No, I mean, other than the Slim Reaper, but it's just my favorite nickname in the NFL.
That's a good one to go out. All right, folks. Thanks for listening to another episode. Next week, we will hit number 15 through number 1 on the top wide receivers in the league. See you later.
Peace.